Historic Preservation Review Board, the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, and the National Capital Planning Commission for full reviews within their jurisdictional authority and a vote before adoption. ANC 2 advises the Public Space Committee that ANC 2 requests that the committee incorporate the following into the draft small cell design guidelines. 1. A full-scale mock-up of the small cell installations by each carrier should be constructed for review, comments, and CFA approval prior to the consideration of initial applications for Georgetown. 2. The size, color, diameter, and finish of all small cell equipment, including antennas, antenna-related equipment, cabinets, shroud, and conduit with no exposed wiring should be specified, and mounting hardware should not exceed the dimensions of the approved mock-up. 3. The guidelines should require carriers to submit yearly photographs of all small cell installations to ensure compliance. 4. Real-time maps of all actual small cell pole locations should be made publicly available. 5. Real-time maps of all proposed small cell pole locations should be made publicly available. 6. All small cell facilities should be required to perform pre- and post-installation radio frequency emission measurements on a minimum of 3 selected nodes yearly within the small cell system to confirm compliance with the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, regulations. As ANC's entire community will be subject to involuntary radio frequency exposure, and this exposure may have negative effects for people with radio frequency emission disabilities or sensitivities. 7. There should be no fans, cooling devices, or backup generators permitted to be placed on or near small cell facilities or installations. 8. Small cell facilities or installations should be located at intersecting residential property lines. 9. Small cell facilities or installations in residential neighborhoods should be located to reduce any obstructions to property sightlines as much as possible. 10. When installed in a business or commercial district and or mixed-use zone area, care should be taken to locate the small cell facilities or installations so as to avoid negatively impacting businesses. Small cell facilities or installations should not be located in front of storefront windows, sidewalk cafes, outdoor patio seating, primary walkways, primary entrances or exits, or in such a way that would impede deliveries to the establishment. Small cell facilities or installations should be located within properties as much as possible. 11. The number of poles installed in ANC 2E should be minimized. ANC 2E advises that hoteling should be seriously considered as a requirement, and the maximum number of poles per block face that are specified in the guidelines should not be increased. 12. Any additional poles that are installed in ANC 2E should be required to conform to the illustration set forth in the guidelines. Unless any modifications are approved on an individual case-by-case basis by the Public Space Committee, the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts, and the Historic Preservation Review Board. 13. As proposed in the guidelines and as stressed by members of the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts during its most recent public hearing, the vaults for all poles should be required to be located underground. 14. Small cell technology that becomes obsolete and or pole owners cease conducting business in the District of Columbia, these poles should be removed within 60 days. ANC 2E advises the Public Space Committee to incorporate in the current version of the draft of small cell design guidelines, the Office of Chief Technology Officer, OCTO, Wi-Fi hardware concept design for hardware that is proposed to be attached in the small cell poles. Meaning, we want the Wi-Fi component to be in the current version of the small cell. ANC 2E advises the Public Space Committee that the following should require 30-day notice to the affected ANC and the specific single-member district commission. 1. Any small cell facility installation. 2. All small cell facility maintenance. 3. All small cell facility upgrades. And 4. Any location changes to existing small cell facility deployments. ANC 2E advises the Public Space Committee that any future changes to the draft small cell design guidelines should require a 30-day notice to ANC and to the public. ANC 2E advises the Public Space Committee that This resolution has the support of the Citizens Association of Georgetown, the Relief Citizens Association, the Hillendale Homeowners Association, Trees for Georgetown, the Georgetown Main Street, the Georgetown Business Improvement District, and the Georgetown Business Association. ANC 280 advises the public space to incorporate the recommendations contained in this resolution into the revised draft small cell design guidelines, and then to hold public hearings for community input as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to mirror back to you the comments you made. I know that ANC 2E has taken a very proactive and a very constructive engagement regarding this program writ large. For example, ANC 2E with the Georgetown bid, and I believe the Georgetown Citizens Association hosted a small cell neighborhood town hall in, I want to say September.
September 13th.
13th, right?
www.smallcelltownhall.com.
www.smallcelltownhall.com, which should be your homepage, if I could recommend, when you open up Google. And coincidentally, I was actually at your ANC meeting for a separate matter when you brought this subject up, I believe, for the first time,
Right.
back in maybe
July 2nd.
July, there we go. I think that type of proactive engagement has been very productive, very fruitful. I've seen you at our meetings, as you mentioned, both before and up to today, from when these first started. So that's very appreciated. I do want to go through some of the specific points you made, and I'll start with your comment about ANC 2E advises that the Public Space Committee incorporate in this is about the OCTO point. So let me bluff this, which is, as I've learned, bluff is the bottom line up front. It's a very helpful technique. So I want to start with the comment that you made about the Office of the Chief Technology Officer. So my question for you is, ANC 2E advises the Public Space Committee to incorporate in the current version of the draft small cell guidelines the Office of the Chief Technology Officer Wi-Fi hardware concept design for the hardware that is proposed to attach to the small cell pole. Do you want us to incorporate it by reference? Are you asking us to regulate their wireless access points, or is it more like this is the standard wireless access point that has been adopted by OCTO, though it may be subject to future modifications by OCTO as it sees fit?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we appreciate OCTO. We had the Chief Crew Croft at our meeting. We want to see the poles as going up. So he says they're going to be attached. They're going to be, I believe, they're going to be piggybacking. We want our design, your design, to incorporate that for ANC 2 and see how the poles look with the Wi-Fi attachment to it, and so that the Commission of Fine Arts and the Old Georgetown Board and the Historic Restoration Board can get an accurate view of what the pole will look like in our neighborhood.
So is that a bit more toward the mock-ups then? Like, here's what the standards are for a wireless access point. Here's what the standard for a wireless access point attached to various iterations would look like? Is that what you're looking for?
Well, obviously we'd like both, but we'd like to see the mock-ups. We'd like to see it with a mock-up, and then when OCTO determines which poles are advantageous or works for them, we'd like to see that so we can incorporate that to the CFA or the Georgetown Board. Because, again, what I found in my experience working with the Old Georgetown, the CFA, the Historic Restoration Board, when they're given the right tools, when they're given the right site plans and the contacts, they make really good recommendations. And maybe when there's an area of design or where you can put the Wi-Fi component within 15 or 20 feet, maybe on some poles it will work different depending on the technology. Maybe we can use it on a different pole that is not so much in front of maybe a historic building or structure or an area in Georgetown, so that we would have the ability to provide advice and recommendations, but not deny the district's goal of Wi-Fi coverage.
Okay. So one element is that once the guidelines are published, the general goal would be that any application that's consistent with the guidelines would go through a standard review process where it would not come before the Public Space Committee, it wouldn't go to the ANC for review and comments, and the only ones that would be coming to the Public Space Committee and would go to ANCs for review and comment would be those that are non-standard, those that don't comply with the standards or the guidelines as they're published. Are you asking that all of those in ANC 2E go to the Commission of Fine Arts?
We're asking in the beginning to see if draft guidelines include the Wi-Fi component.
And then we'll go from there.
We'll go from there.
Okay. Understood. Thank you. You also note in here that if there are changes to the draft small cell design guidelines, that should require a 30-day notice to the ANC and to the public. Generally speaking, substantive changes would go through a process like that. Those that are more technical in nature, like we dropped a comma or we included a person or entity whose name needs to be changed, those would normally not go through that type of process. But generally speaking, if we go through a substantive change, we will absolutely go through the same process.
And we appreciate that. Just one quick question. In the MLA, we're not discussing that. You use the phrase de minimis and now use substantive. Is there a public space dictionary that would describe with an example? What would be an example of de minimis, or non-de minimis, or substantive? I mean, is it something that just like you see it like when you see it when you
Justice Potter Stewart, notwithstanding, yes, it would be generally speaking, if we were to list like this is de minimis and this is not de minimis, we could give you some examples, but to say that this is the definition of de minimis would probably, unfortunately, invite the fact that some things that
my meter's not reading properly, I need to put the antenna this way. We will never get a notice of that. That's why we're asking for the yearly photographs. We're recommending to our Citizens Association of Georgetown and all our other members of Relief and Illinois that people have technological block gaps to take pictures of the installation so they don't change slightly by minutes over time. We're afraid of that extra antenna. We're afraid of that antenna being closer. I think in the MLA you said 10 feet to a residential building.
That's my recollection.
We're afraid that somehow it gets closer because, as you well know, especially in Georgetown, our walkways are very narrow, and that's why we put in some of our points why the installation should be at intersecting property lines to avoid the sight line, because as you well see that they're going to be at our second floor and our third floor bedrooms in some cases of our townhomes, and we'd like to avoid, even though we all want good cell coverage, we'd like to have not to see the cell coverage every night.
Understood. From the District Department of Transportation, which provides you street lights that are important for safety and walkability, we know that some people are concerned about those lights themselves, so we're familiar with the idea.
So that's what we meant by de minimis, and that's why we were concerned. And that's why I think we said that to you before at this. We're worried that when it goes to the top system, which we are in favor of, the top system will determine what is kicked out. And we're just concerned that there's reasonable standards everybody agrees to that goes to the top and then doesn't get kicked out, and then gets kicked out of the top system, as you pointed out.
And so actually that's a great segue for me to our permitting system. So the permitting system will require all of these applications to go to a variety of reviewers. Every application will go to OCTA. Every application will go to the Urban Forestry Division. Every application will go to a set of reviewers. And then if it's in the historic area, it will go to historic preservation. If it's in the CFA area, it will go to CFA. For them to confirm that yes, for the purposes of CFA, it matches what the guidelines required in this area. For the purposes of historic preservation or for urban forestry, it matches what the requirements are. So that we have the subject matter experts reviewing individual applications. So I think you can rest assured that if we have guidelines that everybody is comfortable with, and applications come in, they will still be reviewed substantively by the subject matter experts in those areas for that. And deviations then, as I said, would come before you.
And that's why we trust you, and that's what we put in our very first paragraph, our second paragraph. We understand that it's been going through working groups and comments, but at the end of the day, we'd like the Urban Forestry Advisory Council, which is made up of, I believe, DDOT, and the CFA, the NCPC, and the HPRB, to actually vote on the final guidelines, so that all the ANC 2E wants is what every resident has to go through, the same procedures and jurisdictional requirements. And so if this gets voted on, not just commented on, then we feel more sure that this is something that falls into what we're all looking for.
Understood. That's why we've been partners with Commission of Fine Arts, we've been partners with NCPC, Historic Preservation, and others, but we can't make them do something any more than we would ask that they, in the same way that we would ask that they not make us do something. So if CFA chooses not to take a vote, that's fine. If CFA chooses to take a vote, that's great as well. We would encourage them. We would encourage CFA, NCPC, Historic Preservation to formally, actively adopt the standards. But that's their choice.
Do you ask them to formally adopt the standards?
I believe we have, and we'll make sure it goes in writing to them, if that's what you're interested in. I don't think it iterates anything that we haven't said before, which is that these guidelines are important. They have to reflect the most important elements related to management of the right-of-way, and each of those bodies has a unique a role to play. The Urban Forestry Division is looking at just looking at the guidelines and providing substantive comments. Is that being meant by the Urban Forestry Advisory Council?
So there's the advisory council that deals with the tree canopy coverage, and we just wanted to make sure that that as you well know, and after everything gets approved, but through time, when PETCO or other utility needs to treat, we want to make sure that the canopy goals of the district homeowners, which are so laudable, are always being enforced, and through deed and through word, and it's very tough.
So that's one of the reasons why Urban Forestry is very directly involved in these guidelines, because their responsibility to manage and maintain the street tree canopy, which is the effective one here.
Right.
Because we're not talking about canopies on private property or in a public parking area. We're talking about the ones that are directly adjacent to the street trees. That's why they're the most critical and responsible agency for it, because like Ms. Roos and the is for streetlights, Earl Utzler is for street trees. So we feel very comfortable that they've got the best interest of their asset in mind. I leave it with them to make decisions about.
We have trees for Georgetown, who can speak with much more detail. I just wanted to make sure that's why we put in our first, that's what we're very, my meter's not reading properly, I need to put the antenna this way. We will never get a notice of that. That's why we're asking for the yearly photographs. We're recommending to our Citizens Association of Georgetown and all our other members for Leaf and Illinois that people have technological lockouts to take pictures of the installation so they don't change slightly by the minutes over time. We're afraid of that extra antenna. We're afraid of that antenna being closer. I think in the MLA you said 10 feet to a residential building.
That's my recollection.
We're afraid that somehow it gets closer because, as you well know, especially in Georgetown, our walkways are very narrow, and that's why we put in some of our points why the installation should be at intersecting property lines to avoid the sight line, because as you well see that they're going to be at our second floor and our third floor bedrooms in some cases of our townhomes, and we'd like to avoid, even though we all want good cell coverage, we'd like to have not to see the cell coverage every night.
Understood. From the District Department of Transportation, which provides you streetlights that are important for safety and walkability, we know that some people are concerned about those lights themselves, so we're familiar with the idea.
So that's what we meant by de minimis, and that's why we were concerned, and that's why I think we said that to you before at this, we're worried that when it goes to the top system, which we are in favor of, the top system will determine what is kicked out, and we're just concerned that there are reasonable standards everybody agrees to that goes to the tops and then doesn't get kicked out, and then gets kicked out of the top system, as you pointed out.
And so actually that's a great segue for me to our permitting system. So the permitting system will require all of these applications to go to a variety of reviewers. Every application will go to OCTO. Every application will go to the Urban Forestry Division. Every application will go to a set of reviewers. And then if it's in the historic area, it will go to historic preservation. If it's in the CFA area, it will go to CFA. For them to confirm that yes, for the purposes of CFA, it matches what the guidelines required in this area. For the purposes of historic preservation or for urban forestry, it matches what the requirements are. So that we have the subject matter experts reviewing individual applications. So I think you can rest assured that if we have guidelines that everybody is comfortable with, and applications come in, they will still be reviewed substantively by the subject matter experts in those areas for that. And deviations then, as I said, would come to fruition.
And that's why we trust you, and that's what we put in our very first paragraph, our second paragraph. We understand that it's been going through working groups and comments, but at the end of the day, we'd like the Urban Forestry Advisory Council, which is made up of, I believe, DDOT, and the CFA, the NCPC, and the HPRB, to actually vote on the final guidelines, so that all ANC 2E wants is what every resident has to go through, the same procedures and jurisdictional requirements. And so if this gets voted on, not just commented on, then we feel more assured that this is something that falls into what we'll call it.
Understood. That's why we've been partners with Commission of Fine Arts. We've been partners with NCPC, Historic Preservation, and others. But we can't make them do something any more than we would ask that they, in the same way that we would ask that they not make us do something. So if CFA chooses not to take a vote, that's fine. If CFA chooses to take a vote, that's great as well. We would encourage them. We would encourage CFA, NCPC, Historic Preservation to formally, actively adopt the standards. But that's their choice.
You asked them to formally adopt the standards?
I believe we have, and we'll make sure it goes in writing to them, if that's what you're interested in. I don't think it iterates anything that we haven't said before, which is that these guidelines are important. They have to reflect the most important elements related to management of the right-of-way, and each of those bodies has unique a role to play. The Urban Forestry Division is looking at the guidelines and providing substantive comment. Is that being meant by the Urban Forestry Advisory Council?
So there's the advisory council that deals with the tree canopy coverage, and we just wanted to make sure that that as you well know, and after everything gets approved, but through time, with PETCO or every utility needs to treat, we want to make sure that the canopy goals of the district home, which are so laudable, are always being enforced, and through deed and through word, and it's very tough.
So that's one of the reasons why Urban Forestry is very directly involved in these guidelines, because their responsibility to manage and maintain the street tree canopy, which is the affected one here.
Right.
Because we're not talking about canopies on private property or in a public parking area. We're talking about the ones that are directly adjacent to the street trees. That's why they're the most critical and responsible agency for it, because like Ms. Roos and the is for streetlights, Earl Utzler is for street trees. So we feel very comfortable that they've got the best interest of their asset in mind. I leave it with them to make decisions about
when we have trees for Georgetown, who can speak with much more detail. I just wanted to make sure that's why we put in our first, that's what we're very.
So I can quote it exactly. It's item number 6. All small. By the way, it is a challenging thing to say. After a period of time, it'll sound like a small smell.
Yes.
So, all small cell facilities should be required to perform pre and post installation radio frequency emission measurements on a minimum of pre-selected nodes yearly within the small cell system to confirm compliance with federal communications regulations. We're not saying that that's not a bad idea, and we're not saying that that shouldn't be encouraged. We're saying that that is not within our purview or jurisdiction. That's the equivalent of having us require Washington Gas perform a test of its gas itself, or its gas lines itself. In terms of the jurisdiction and authority of the Public Space Committee and the Public Space Permitting Office through delegated authority, it's not germane to their authority. Federal Communication Commission is the entity where that would start, and they're the ones who have the authority to regulate, as we understand it, radio frequency and radio frequency emissions. And you may want to check with either the local office or with the federal office, which is probably pretty much the same thing, on what the standards and requirements are for testing, et cetera. And they could help guide you in terms of finding a mechanism to ensure compliance with some level of testing.
But who would that be? The DOEE that would, what department, district would, because we have the Public Service Commission that regulates that, and we also have the OPC that handles problems with that. So all we're asking is what basically you have the MLA. I believe you have a section of MLA that calls for they have to comply to the FCC requirements.
Correct. We explicitly state that they have to comply with FCC requirements.
And that's all we're asking for too, but we're asking for it to be done before you install them, after you install them, and yearly. We're not asking them to be extra compliant. We're not asking them to have, I understand from the Environmental Health Trust that there's different levels. peak and so forth? We're just saying,
All I'm explaining is that's not our jurisdiction to require a particular regimen of testing or limitations or standards. That is something that FCC has the authority to do, and if it delegates that authority to a state, or if it authorizes a state entity, or in this case, the District of Columbia entity, to do that, it is not the Department of Transportation, it's not the Public Space Committee. It could be DOEE, it could be DOH, it could be any one of a number of entities that occur to me, but the best situated entity to tell you to whom it's been delegated is the Federal Communications Commission. We haven't explicitly reached out to them about that question, simply because within our bandwidth and purview, it's almost like, I'll call it a quote, other duty as assigned. It's something that's outside of our jurisdiction, but it is something that we noted as of interest. You may even want to find from the small cell providers. They might have information about that would help you to let you know what the FCC requirements and standards for testing are. So you may want to follow up with that.
well, thank you. And this dovetails something you said earlier. Is the small cell facility installations going to become a utility like Petco? Are they going to become a utility over the course of years where they're just accepted after they're established their right of way in our neighborhoods, that they're going to go through a public service commission, or are they going to have to?
For the purposes of installation in the public space, like any other owner of infrastructure, they have to go through a permitting process. And currently, based on the master license agreement, that anything that is approved for installation in the right-of-way has a drop-dead date. I believe that is 20 years from the MLA. So as I recall correctly from, and I hope I'm correct, from the master license agreement, it doesn't matter if something has been approved under a permit and it's 20 years later, the MLA dies and the equipment installed under it dies. Okay. Now, I don't know where I'll be 20 years from now, but that record will be set for the me who will be me to manage and handle that.
So basically, you're literally saying for the next 20 years it's under your control.
So far, that the element of installation in public space is under our purview. Now, who knows what the FCC will do? But I can also tell you that based on our review of the FCC decision from, I believe,
25th.
the 25th of September, we are fully within what they're requiring. So there's nothing that we're doing that is contradictory to or outside of our authority based on what the FCC has mandated or prohibited states to do.
So when that order takes effect in 90 days, is that when the shot clock will start for us?
I'll want to get back to you on what you mean by the shot clock, but we'll make sure that we are in full compliance. Thank you. Do other committee members have questions for the Commissioner?